Hello all, thank you for clicking on this video. Today we will be discussing Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. So if you haven't read this book yet, don't worry, this video will be spoiler free. If you have no idea, Turtles All the Way Down is John Green's most recent release. As you probably know, he most recently wrote The Fault in Our Stars prior to this 6 years ago. Those of us in the book community who are John Green fans have been anticipating this book for quite a long time. And I am so excited to say I do not think it disappointed in the slightest. I absolutely loved this book. This book follows a 16-year-old girl named Aza. Aza does have obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. Aza describes her diagnosis as thought spirals, and by that she means essentially that her thoughts are spiraling out of control. Aza lives in Indianapolis, Indiana. In Indianapolis, at the time this story begins, we are faced with this billionaire who has gone missing after criminal charges were opened up against him and his business. His son is a childhood friend of Aza's, and there is this reward of $100,000 for anyone who brings information that will lead to the finding of said billionaire. So Aza's best friend, who happens to be the greatest character of all time, is like, we have to go talk to this kid because you know him and we gotta see if we can figure things out. And thus our story begins. Aza becomes close with Davis again and they bloom a budding kind of romance, but Aza's thought spirals and OCD kind of inhibit her actions, her relationship, and a lot of facets of her life. And this book kind of explores that, with the subplot being trying to figure out what happened to this billionaire who happens to be her kind of romantic interest's dad. So let's get down to the characters. The billionaire's son is named Davis. Davis is a brilliant character. He is so thoughtful. He thinks about things a lot. Now, a common complaint against John Green's books is that his characters don't feel like teenagers, they don't feel realistic, they're pretentious, etc., etc. One, I think that's malarkey. I think that's silly. I love that John Green does not dumb down his plot, his characters, the way they talk, anything for teens just because he's writing YA. Totally okay if that's your opinion. However, if that is your opinion, this is going to be the character that really brings that pretentiousness out for you. He writes in a blog online and he has like deep philosophical ideas and it's definitely like a step above. I totally am okay with this character, but again, if that's one of your complaints against John Green, this is where you're going to get that the most in this book. However, the other characters I don't find pretentious in the slightest. I think they are some of John Green's, not even some of, in fact, his most grounded characters to date. So let's jump into Aza. Aza is our protagonist, has OCD. She describes this OCD as thought spirals. So the idea is essentially that her thoughts will spiral out of control until essentially she is chasing her thoughts and at the whim of her thoughts and can only do what her thoughts and kind of tell her to do. I think this is so beautifully portrayed, not in just the way Aza feels, but in the way John Green writes that to describe it to a person who may not have understood or experienced that prior to reading this book. A lot of times Aza's having these thought spirals, he'll put the spirally part in like italics and then her like trying to be rational, reasonable, logical in like regular text. And it'll almost be like a dialogue between herself. And that's where it starts to spiral, like, no, I shouldn't do this. Yes, you should. No, I shouldn't do this. Yes, I should. And it's not like a split personality. It's just like her trying to be reasonable to these genuine like anxieties and problems she's facing. And that like dialogue between them really epitomizes the spirals he's discussing. And I think it's beautifully written, beautifully portrayed in words. And that's one of the reasons I think this would not make a good movie in the slightest, because so much of this is inner monologue, dialogue within Aza's head. You could probably adapt this, but I don't think it will have the same effect. Now let's talk about Daisy, the best friend. Daisy is like the greatest character of all time. She is funny, she is sassy, she is ridiculous, she's complex. There are times where she does things, says things, writes things that you'll be like, wait a second. And her and Aza definitely get into arguments, and it's beautiful to see these teenagers who've been friends essentially their whole life talk about the resentments and issues they have with each other that have built up over the course of their entire life, especially with Aza figuring out how people have to talk to her and how they feel about everything that's going on with her and how she maybe hasn't even paid attention to them as much as she should have. And when Aza realizes this, John Green really tackles how her perspective changes and how her relationships with everyone are kind of put in a new light. Like, this is why I have this relationship and this is why I have that relationship, and it's very well thought out. I also appreciate that while there is a romance in this, it's not like a hot and heavy, overly done, Romeo and Juliet-esque romance, which in my opinion is what I felt like Tifios was. It was just running into the sunset. This was so much slower, this was so much more methodical, and obviously a huge part of that is because Aza has to take it slower and has to do things in her own way. And I really like how John Green explored this. There are points where Aza's anxiety and OCD get really bad. And we really see how deep these compulsions and these thought spirals take her and how dark these things can be for her. It's very interesting to kind of like have your eyes opened to that. Like, you hear about it, you can talk to people about it, but until you see kind of what it's like inside someone's brain, have still this kind of sense of separation and you don't quite understand it. And that's what's so great about this book. Own voice is John Green. It should be all of John Green in the future. While I think Tifios is still his magnus opus, I think that Turtles All the Way Down is his most important work. And I'm so glad he wrote this. And I'm just really happy with this. The diversity in terms of mental illness and awareness is so good. We do have a discussion of differentiations in social economic classes, which is great. Obviously, we have the billionaire. We have Aza, who's well off, even though she doesn't feel like she's well off. You know, she's pretty like middle class. She has her own car, but it's beat up and gross. She has her own computer, etc. And then we have Daisy, who has siblings. She has to share rooms with her siblings. She's definitely that like lower middle class life. She has a roof over her head. She doesn't go hungry, but she doesn't have a car. She has a part-time job in school, which Aza doesn't have for multiple reasons, but Aza doesn't have to worry about that, and Daisy does. We see these discrepancies in their friendship and the conflicts they're creating, and it's a really good look. I really enjoyed that John Green did this. I could honestly talk about this book for so long, but I won't. So we're just gonna cut it off there. If you want to discuss this book further, let's talk about it in the comments down below. No spoilers, or if you are gonna do spoilers, that's fine. Just put a spoiler warning for those who may not have read this book, especially since this is a spoiler-free review. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!
Baby, I beg you, yeah.